I think that probably a little bit delayed because of the iciness of the roads and the weather outside as people are traveling. Because right now the roads are pretty dangerous out there. I know I have the benefit of not having to leave my house, so that makes it nice. But again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I know I'm personally very excited to see this fireside chat this morning. And I would also say, I mean, what Pete's been putting together here with Fireside Chats is really also just the beginning of what we're looking forward to for the coming year, for information, education, networking, programming, all around IoT. And it's something that we talk about a lot on our leadership team meetings, is that, of course, you know, IoT has been longstanding within public services, but especially now with not just, you know, obviously changes in perception since COVID or advances in technology, but infrastructure funding. All these different things are coming together right now that takes things that were always there. There was always people working on it, but truly elevates it and escalates it into something that needs more eyes on it, more thinking, and more understanding right now. And I know that this team right here with Don and, you know, Dan Morgan, when he joins, if he's not sliding around like the ice capades out on the roads right now, are truly dedicated to helping you bring to the table this year. So please join us early and often. And that being said, I will take up a second more. Thank you, Pete.
You got it, Justin. Don, you have any opening remarks? You're so integral to the team.
Just a quick cadence. We meet every other Thursday morning at this time, so you're all welcome. You'll see announcements. If you have any desire to be added to our mailing list, just put your email in the chat window. Appreciate it.
Awesome, thank you. And if we are joined by Dan, I will do a pivot so Dan can introduce himself. But Justin and Don and everybody, thanks. I know there's another big session today with the Emerging Technology Group, but just a reminder, we do this every other Thursday, I believe, right, Don? And we encourage people to bring us ideas, and we have an opportunity, I think, at least once a month to bring in folks outside the Beltway, like we have with our guest Ken Wolf today, talking about things that matter inside the Beltway, but having impact outside of it. So I see my buddy Mike Rice joining from the Emerging Tech COI. So this is great. All right. Without further ado, I'm Pete Tseronis. I, along with Justin and Don and Dan and everyone else on the Smart Infrastructure Working Group, which is who we are. To Justin's point, you know, there's just so much going on today with the infrastructure bill passing, which if you read it, there's a lot in there about devices that are going to be here, there, and everywhere. We have a threat landscape. We have an executive order. We'll touch on that a little bit. That really is speaking to zero trust and all this jargon that can be mind blowing, if you will. But at the end of the day, it's about protecting those infrastructure sectors: energy, water, manufacturing, leveraging technology to have real-time information, so that we can keep our grid up, we can keep our water clean and our air breathable, just for example. So I'm excited. Ken Wolf, I'm not gonna read his bio, but he comes from us from the great city of Pittsburgh. Ken's the president and chief operating officer of PacketViper. Aside from being a seasoned business executive, technology strategist, and a collaborative partner, I've known Ken for years. He really has an insight into what the government and the Beltway specifically is doing to push out policy and regulation, but the impact on cities and communities and municipalities is his passion. Yeah, he's a cyber guy, but he's a business cyber kind of guy. And PacketViper, they're a unique company, folks. They're focused on security, resilience, and sustainability across all of the critical sectors in our country, all 16. I mentioned he comes from the great smart infrastructure, tech-savvy city of Pittsburgh that I get to visit quite often, an amazing city. He's very well-versed in Executive 14028 and specifically the OT and IT integration component. So, Ken, welcome. Feel free to add to anything that I left out that you want to share. He is a Providence Friar. I'm a Villanova Wildcat. So there's a little bit of that. And he hails from the great Long Island zip code of New York.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And thanks, Justin, and the whole ACT-IAC, with this ACT-IAC working group team. You know, I really appreciate the mission of ACT-IAC in terms of accelerating outcomes, and really looking forward to this chat today. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And folks on the call, please use the chat. You want to just I think for purposes of this, raise a hand. I'll just call you out. We have no script really, but we kind of want to, you get to know Ken, get to know the technology, and get to know, what they're doing to support so many of the sectors that our federal government supports. So Ken, let's jump right in. I mean, PacketViper, you Google it, it's a company that's got a lot of IT in its DNA, and you've been leading a lot of the effort, startup into now it's having impact in commercial sector and government. Tell us a little bit about your journey, you personally, and the evolution of the company, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you guys, I'll talk really about the business and how we've kind of made our journey into OT, because honestly, we didn't start out as an OT company. Our founder, we founded the business to solve a problem that he was having in IT. He built the product to solve a problem he was having as a network administrator in IT. Took a little money, found out that a lot of people were dealing with similar types of problems in terms of noise on the network. And so we evolved into a very initially boundary focused technology with specialties in automated attack prevention, threat detection, prevention, and response. We secured a lot of customers early on in critical infrastructure sectors, public and private sector. And our customers started to come to us and say, we would like to start to use this on the OT side of our shop. And we got very excited. And then we very quickly realized we didn't really understand what that meant. And through our customers and honestly, Pete and Dotson Bridges facilitated a lot of conversations with us. We had some early meetings down at Caesar, down at Energy, some of the national labs. We really came to appreciate first the different mission of OT, right? When you think about information technology, there's that age-old saying that the mission of IT is CIA. The information, you have to maintain the confidentiality and the integrity and the availability of that information. And we quickly came to realize that the mission of OT networks is quite different, right? Because OT networks power the physical processes that we all depend on so much in our lives. Think about the things behind water treatment plants, right? And energy farms and whatnot. So the mission of OT networks is to preserve that process, right? And uptime and reliability and the availability of services and control over that process is what OT networks are all about. So, we came to realize that we needed to make some changes, and we've been on this journey now where we've seemed really fit to purpose to solve a lot of problems in OT. But it's funny because that's just not what we started out to do.
Great stuff. And forgive me, I have a little bit of a frog in the throat today. But Ken, the $1.9 billion that's part of this larger $1.2 trillion package in the infrastructure bill, or most notably, or what it's formally called, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We all know that that's going to be an influx of money that goes in specifically to focus on, as we've been hearing, bridges and roads and things like that. The very sectors and domains that we depend on, the energy in our homes. So I appreciate that you as an IT company in a constantly evolving mission and vision of where you want to be, you're kind of moving along with what you're hearing out of the Beltway and where our country's going from a resilience standpoint. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, so much so that really our main focus right now is on the cyber physical defense of distributed OT endpoints, right? So whereas we used to just sit at boundaries, now, our real value is in, working with, water, wastewater utilities, energy companies, and making sure that as they come to connect, so in the OT world, there are a lot of things that power the process that used to be disconnected, right? So if you think about pump stations and wellheads, they used to be, you hear the phrase air gapped, right? They were protected through isolation. The world didn't know that they were out there and they were doing their thing, right? And then in the name of uptime, they were not connected, right? And now those things, there's a lot of advantage with all the advantages of connecting those assets in terms of the monitoring and management and efficiency benefits that you get through connection. Connection also introduces risk, right? So if you're a municipal water authority with 24 pump stations, every time you connect one, to your network so that you can gain those advantages of connectivity, you also create a new pathway for threats into the network. So, the cyber defense of these assets becomes very important. And the reality is that the threats, a lot of IT cybersecurity solutions are not fit to purpose for OT. And this is what we came to realize, right? So the threat detection capabilities that work really well for us on an IT network, they weren't going to work as well on an OT network. Some of that's because of, you think about the purpose of that network. Threats on an IT network will get on that network and they'll look around. They'll do a lot of reconnaissance scanning so they can escalate their privileges and metastasize throughout the network. Threats on an OT network tend to be a little more passive, right? There's man in the middle type of threats, and they sit and they lurk and they listen. So we had to create a completely new and different type of threat detection capability so that we could detect those threats and it's called reducing the dwell time, right? When, getting those threats to reveal themselves earlier so you can eradicate them. So that's kind of how we came to be now very, very focused on these distributed assets that were previously not connected to the networks, but now they're connected and they're adding a lot of value. They drive a lot of efficiency, but they also introduce risk. So, different IT and OT, different missions of those networks, different risks and benefits.
Well said. And we're going to pivot really quickly because I know in our prep calls, you were talking about specifically how the executive order is really driving a lot of your road mapping. Everybody on this call knows, we're throwing around the OT and the IT, and I come from a background and have clients in this space. And, we all know IT is the internet, right? It's the Internet of Things. Justin is doing so much work to push that. Look, it's great to have more devices, but it's also introducing risk, to Ken, your point. But why don't you, Ken, just for an outside the beltway, from an outside the beltway perspective, talk a bit about how that executive order is having an impact on you. Here in DC, there's a lot of compliance and response, and there's a lot of information in the order itself. But it does say on page 1 in the policy that it really is about fostering a secure cyberspace, recognizing that the vital machinery that underpins our country needs to be more resilient, and that we have to leverage IT in order to fortify that resilience. But is there anything that really sticks out for you that you appreciate about the order?
Well, for one thing, in general, I actually think that it's, I tend to see and I hear from people that it's most helpful when the guidance, so much of us look to the Beltway for guidance, right? And for those North Stars. And I think when the more that we get how guidance as opposed to what guidance, that's always really helpful. And I think there's lots of that good type of, here's what, not just what you need to do, but how we'd like to see you do it, steering people towards zero trust and things like that. So, and I think you see more of that in general, right? CIS has been given some really good guidance. Very specific memorandum came out last week about, industrial systems defending against Russian attacks, right? And this very granular guidance. So, I really appreciate the granularity and the how-to guidance that we see in this executive order. I think it's striking very early on, though, with second or third paragraph, right? First sentence when it says, incremental improvements are not going to help us here, right? And that's really kind of I think that makes you sit up, right? Because, it talks about keeping pace with threats, but the threats are the pace setters, right? Like the bad guys attack and innovate and attack again relentlessly, much faster than we can update our defenses, right? So it's really, I think, a little cold water to the face there, the realization how the need to make these changes in a more than incremental way. Because again, I think, it's hard to do these things and crawl, walk, run, in terms of being careful, especially in OT, operators are very careful. So, I think the boldness of it is called for and appropriate. And then I think, when you go to the one thing that struck me in terms of what's in the order versus what we hear, there's a whole section on, the need to modernize federal government agency cybersecurity. And, the thing that we hear a lot from our critical infrastructure customers there's an ongoing discussion about how do we modernize without a rip and replace, though, right? We're in a conversation right now with an oil and gas giant, right? And they've got a concentration of programmable logic controllers, PLCs, that are dated, right? Because in the name of uptime, one of the things that you see in OT is these networks frequently go unpatched and not updated. Why? Because it's working, right? And again, keeping the process going is the mission. So, you know, this group that we're speaking with, they've got a concentration of PLCs, they're manufacturer end of life. So they're old. Now they want to connect them, right? So they weren't designed with cybersecurity in mind, but to rip and replace those with new ones that are kind of maybe more cyber secure, you know, going back to the OEM, that's an 8-figure project that's going to take years, right? And like we said, threats are coming at people relentlessly right now. So, you know, I think there's we see a lot of people looking at this executive order thinking about, okay, are there compensating controls, right? So that I can honor the spirit of this order, but do it in a cost-effective time way, because it also says keep pace with the threats, which inherently creates a sense of urgency and a need for speed that you don't always see on the OT side. Again, where the mission is uptime, reliability, and the operators are understandably careful and methodical.
Yeah, I appreciate a lot of that, that it goes deeper than, if you, again, for all of us who know, it's kind of who in the Beltway here isn't having a session or a meeting with a government agency and they bring up Executive Order 14028 says you should do the following. You know, I found some really interesting readings, Ken, and it's the 2021 report card for America's infrastructure, you know, put out by the American Society of Civil Engineers. And it really speaks to, right on the first page, key findings regarding the infrastructure, that asset management is helping to prioritize limited funding. And, you know, when I think of, and I think if we all think about, it's one thing to inspect a railroad or to go out to a wellhead and to kind of visually see it in that point in time. But the idea of, you know, having a device, you know, with a PacketViper that can report out, you know, the slightest changes, you know, in milliseconds, that could essentially save lives, that can keep the resilience. And I know from the DOE, that's a big part of your evolution, as you've shared, from, hey, we can be viewed as a cyber and IT company, but you really have, with some of your clients, and maybe share a few examples or augment on one where you're having that impact. In this discussion you're leading is a bit of an education for folks too, right? These worlds of OT and IT and smart devices, and what was an IT tool is now an OT IT tool. Maybe do you know some thoughts on that, or just some examples from your customers?
Well, sure thing. And I think that Justin made the comment earlier, but it also does seem like, you know, you can read about IT OT convergence as a thing going back, you know, a decade, right? But it does seem like the acceleration of concern is really very current, right? Colonial Pipeline attack, you know, other headlines that we've seen where our critical infrastructure and these OT processes have come under attack like never before, right? So if you're, you know, I mentioned that oil and gas giant, you know, I'll go to the other end of the spectrum. You know, we have a municipal water authority serving about 20,000 people in the middle of the Southeast. The type of organization of which there are thousands, right? And so they've got a couple dozen pump stations across their network. You know, they connected them via, you know, a budget level cellular connection. And they're an IT customer. So we've been talking about, you know, how to help them with these distributed OT assets. And they said, look, the world doesn't know that our little township has got these pump stations out there doing our thing to support our community. And we said, well, let's take a look, you know. So because, you know, our technology is very fit to purpose to go into the field, because it's agentless, right? So one of the problems IT companies have is everybody wants to put an agent everywhere. You can't put an agent on these OT assets because, again, it'll threaten the performance of those assets. So we've got this agentless detection, prevention, response capability that first thing it does is creates transparency when we go in line. And day 2 of a proof of concept, we showed them that in excess of 50,000 times a day, a couple dozen pump stations that they didn't think anybody knew or cared were out there, they were getting hammered with reconnaissance scans, right? And it really elevated their awareness as to what was going on. And then if something gets through, right? So, if something gets on, it's on the network, right? So, so we have the ability to give that people transparency when they connect those distributed assets. But if you think about something like ransomware, right, which is it's funny, it's a very well branded threat, right? So technologists, non-technologists, everybody knows ransomware is bad because everybody knows what ransom is, right? So think about how ransomware gets on a network. If it's outside the network, try to get on. So we've helped them now obfuscate those connected assets, right? So what our technology does is it makes connected assets hard to see if you're an external threat trying to get onto the network. But if you do somehow get onto the network, we also have the ability to contain it, right? So if a threat got access to one of those pump stations or some type of wellhead at a big oil and gas company, ransomware frequently never really makes its demand when it lands, right? It looks to gather more assets, expand its privileges. And so, we could stop that malware from metastasizing. Also, ransomware malware frequently has to do a command and control phone home to be able to complete its mission. And we can sever that connection. We can also actively stop exfiltration of data, right? So we went to this small municipality who had these couple dozen connected pump stations, and they had, again, low grade cellular connection, very cheap firewalls sitting out in front of these things, and it wasn't working. It wasn't good enough, right? So that's I mean, I mentioned here a couple of things. I mentioned the big oil and gas organization we're working with earlier, down now to your typical US municipality. And all of this, is in response to, the connectivity, gave birth to all of this new need for better protection.
100% well said. And Mike, I appreciate your comment. Mike, you're nodding your head. I feel like you want to ask or say something. Can you chime in? Mike Novak.
So yeah, no, I'm just agreeing wholeheartedly. Coming from a certain large German 3-letter company, I'm familiar with that scenario of talking with organizations, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got this plant. It's been here for 10 or 15 years. We don't have to worry about this." Oh, what happened? Oh, Frank just brought his laptop in, or he brought in his mobile phone, or and all of a sudden they now have a problem. And they're like, "Oh, what do we do now? Oh my God, call Ken." Too late. It's better to get in front of it and accept it as part of that fourth industrial revolution, that this is now not an outlier. This is a problem or a challenge that needs to be addressed up front. So that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
In the preparation for this, Pete and I were talking about just what does it take for people to change behavior, right? And it's typically there's 3 A's of behavioral. It's awareness, acceptance, and action, right? I think right now we are all hyper aware that cyber threats are out there trying to get onto our networks at home, at work, IT, OT, but we all have much different cycles of when we accept that it is real to us, right? And it was funny because I look at just the anecdote with that municipal water authority. After day 3 of that proof of concept, they were like, we need to change the way we're thinking about this whole thing, because they saw the relentless reconnaissance scans against their assets that they rely so much on. And they just thought, who cares? Here we are in the middle of America serving, 15, 20,000 people. Who cares, right? Nobody wants to attack us. And it's just the opposite. Because again, when you look at the executive order, that seemingly benign sentence, keep pace with the threats, that would suggest we are at pace and we are so far behind, right? We are so far behind. And so, the urgency with which people, I think it's a personal journey when people accept that this is an issue for them, because only when they accept it will they change, will they act differently, so that awareness, acceptance, and action, I think that the executive order, and again, all the good guidance coming out of the Beltway, is helping people make that journey as they need to individually.
Well said. Mike raised your hand. I love that you're using the reactions.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Ken, but also, I will express empathy for my Govy friends, because yes, it's an issue. However, And I'm sure we have just a few ex-govs. I can see Doc already smiling. You know, it's a matter of time, resources, and budget. Yes, my pants are on fire, but I don't have the time. I don't have the authority, and I'll wait till it gets up to my neck, because then I can go to my officer and say, help. And then it's that respond, not proactively, but by design, by standard, has to be reactive. So I agree, but I
share your
recognize there's
empathy.
challenges too.
Yeah, I share your empathy. I mean, we